good. Viewers. Michael has been good because when I was on his show last time, if you could call it a show, I told him stop touching yourself. He's got this habit.
In the first episode in 1971, Parkinson was always about the interviewee.
I don't think I'm going to sparkle tonight, Frank.
And right from the start, Parky was sparring with the best.
I'm not going to argue with you.
You're not as dumb as you look.
Interviewing the late, great Muhammad Ali 4 times, the conversations he enjoyed the most.
Come on, show me something. Show me something.
Despite his gentle Yorkshire tilt, he learned from the boxing legend not to pull his punches.
Yes, but I mean, did Yoko's presence, John, did it leave tension in the group?
You've always said that you're not gay. You've always said that your sexual experiences have been with women. Is all of that true?
From his famously frosty interview with Meg Ryan.
If you were me, what would you do now?
Well, just wrap it up.
Parky's illustrious career was not without controversy.
Do you find, in fact, that this, what could be best described as your equipment, in fact, hinders you, perhaps, in that pursuit?
But the king of the sit-down interview often earnestly reflected on his own evolution.
I'd like to get the Meg Ryan one right. So I don't know what happened. I just took against her.
And he always knew how to have fun.
Why is it so aggressive?
It's not aggressive. David is, I call him golden balls, you know, now, because I mean, one of those things I shouldn't have said, but...
Well, your wife told me you like that.
Oh.
Don't touch yourself inappropriately.
We're now going to take a break while we reassemble our thoughts and come back for more advice from the dame and the rest. I'll see you in just a moment. I'm going home.
The charming legend of the small screen will be sorely missed.
Another legendary broadcaster, Ray Martin, is here to talk about the great man. Ray, you crossed paths with him many times throughout your career. Do you remember the first time you met him and how did you forge your bond?
Yeah, I do remember. In fact, just listening to him then makes me smile. He was a great bloke and a class act with a touch of the larrikin about him. I think he would have been, had he been an actor, he would have been a great James Bond. He was debonair and classy and very funny and had a great sense of humour. But so I did him several times in Midday. We did a 60 Minutes profile. I dined out with him several times with Warnie and himself. And then he launched my autobiography. So he was quite a good friend and very generous.
Ray, he mastered the art of the interview. What specifically was Michael Parkinson's magic?
I guess he was very appealing and very charming and very likeable. He did his homework. He did even probably more than Mike Willesee. He had the art of the pause, of just saying nothing. And invariably, as Willesee found here, people would say something, almost they want to fill the void, if you like, of television, because they're used to just yapping. And he used that with a finesse that I haven't seen anyone else used. And quite often, whether it was Ali or whether it was one of the actors that he spoke to, they would say something trying to fill the void. It was a very classy thing, but as well as that, did his homework, was very likeable, had that technique of moving forward and almost luring in to his domain the talent it became, and they were telling him things that they probably hadn't told anyone before. And it's a great technique when you're before 20 or 30 million people.
Of all of his magnificent interviews, did you have a favourite?
Oh, the Ali one was fantastic. It was very funny. When he launched my book, he made the pitch of the launch was the fact that he never interviewed Bradman, whom I interviewed, and I got the only one with him. So he made a whole thing about how he would have loved to have. He mentioned Ali, and then he said, "I would have loved Bradman because he was such a cricket nut," and Audrey Hepburn as well, whom I interviewed. And he joked about that, but very generous in what he had to say overall. When you think that he'd interviewed everybody else.
Yeah, you shared a love for cricket with him and you did pip him at the post to get the sit down with the great Don Bradman. How was that received by Parkinson?
Well, he rang me about it and said, you know, I can't use the language again, but what he called me, he said, you know, he was obviously a Yorkshireman, but had he not been a Yorkshireman, he would have been an Aussie, and some of the language was there on that. But it was really just a pat on the back for having got it, because he'd tried for a long time. His great love, of course, was cricket, and he spent a lot of time out here. And Keith Miller, the great Australian fast bowler and batsman, the all-rounder, was his best mate. He knew Warnie very well and dined and wined with Warnie. But Keith Miller was his real idol. And Keith Miller was a flyboy from World War II who became a very close friend of Parky. And I think Miller and Bradman didn't get on, so maybe that was part of the reason why he never got the interview with Bradman. But whatever reason, he simply loved cricket and loved Australia. I rang him when he won when he got his knighthood, and congratulated him. And he said, "Oh, look, they're in a very humble way. They're giving it to everybody these days. They gave it to Elton John, and they gave it to me." And he said, "They'll bloody well give it to Colonials next. You fellas will get one." And of course, that's what Tony Abbott did. But he thought it was very funny.
Well, Parkinson was a bit like you, Mr. Martin, in that he felt more comfortable asking the questions than being asked the questions, do you know? So what else would you like the public to know about him as a man?
Yeah, he was fairly open. His couple of books that he wrote, the autobiography, then the book about interviews, were fairly open. When we had him on midday, just like, you know, on Tonight, what you saw, I think television is a very honest medium. And, you know, Yana is who you see on television, and Negus is, and I think I am probably. And so Parky was very much the man you saw on television. He may have been urbane and been very much the Englishman without this sort of pomposity that Poms often have. He didn't have that. He was very much a Yorkshireman. But what you saw was what you got. He was very generous. When I asked him if he'd launched the book, he came out and did that. He would appear on whenever we wanted him on the show. He'd appear and be highly entertaining and lovely storyteller and very, very selective of words and so on. He was, you know, he's getting the accolades because he was the best.
It seems like Michael Parkinson and Australia had this kind of incredible connection. What was it about Australia that brought Michael here?
I think he was comfortable. He is, you know, like Ian Botham and a few of the other, not many, but a few of the other English cricketers, they just feel comfortable here. And as I said, Parky had said to me he was a proud Yorkshireman, but he said it quietly. If I hadn't been a Yorkshireman, I would have been an Aussie, but then don't tell anybody that. It was that sort of thing. So he was, whenever he was here, he spent almost half the year here during the cricket season, but he just felt at home here, and people treated him as they should have. They treated him like one of us. And he was, in a sense, one of us. He was a good larrikin, and maybe that didn't come across enough on television, but in personal life he was very charming, very attractive to ladies, despite 60 years of marriage, and it was a handsome pom,
Maybe he and Warnie had that in common, Mr. Martin.
No. I think Warnie's a different kettle of fish totally. But I'm just saying the urbane side of Parky, I think, was one. He was very, very charming.
And Ray, how will you remember him? Do you have a favourite everlasting moment with him?
I think probably just as you played those clips, the interviews, that you smile when you watch Parky. I mean, it was very clever interviewing someone like Dame Edna. He mocked embarrassment, as we all had to do with Dame Edna when she got out of hand. But he was very clever in that. He knew the medium, and television was what he was about. Mind you, as a journalist and as a writer of books later, he was a very, very good writer. So he was a very, very good journalist as well. But television seemed to be made for Parky because it was that wonderful, down-to-earth Englishman rather than the pompous Englishman, and he was just perfect at the time. I think he'd been revelling in the English girls beating the Matildas the other day, but quietly he would have been a little saddened because he was such a pro-Aussie bloke.
Charming, gentle and authentic. He was a man well before his time. Ray, our condolences for the loss of your friend. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you. They're great memories.
I felt so sad when I heard the news, because you really do feel like you know someone like that. You know, he gave so much of himself whilst being a really selfless interviewer, and it just, some of his interviews, especially with Billy Connolly, would have to be some of my favourite interviews of all time.
He absolutely disarmed the guests that sat in front of him. He made them feel safe. He made them feel comfortable, especially in an era. Today we're bombarded by information about celebrities. It is everywhere, all over our social media. In an era where that information, it was really hard to come by. People weren't so public with it. We didn't have social media then. So, studying journalism, he was right up there. So it's a huge loss.